everyone. Thank you for joining our broadcast. This is the third virtual tour in the old city of Jerusalem, courtesy of Israel Pack. And today we will be dealing with one of the most interesting and important war campaigns in the world of the Bible, which is the Assyrian siege of Jerusalem. But before I will take you to the actual archaeological site, I would like to show you the scale model of Jerusalem in the First Temple period. And you will see that this is an amazing way to get a better understanding of the city, of how it developed, and actually to get the understanding of the importance of the actual archaeological site. Okay, so this scale model shows you Jerusalem in the 600s BCE, meaning quite towards the end of this historical time period, towards the end of the First Temple times. But we would like to start with the very beginnings, right? This is a fascinating question, where Jerusalem was born as the city, right? Where is the historical heart of Jerusalem? Okay, so have a look on the model, okay? Have a look on this, and this tiny hill, okay? This is where Jerusalem was born as the city. This is where we're finding the first evidence of permanent human settlement in this area. And the reason why people choose to settle down here is actually the spring. You know that in ancient times, spring is the source of life, right? The flowing waters is the source of life. So the spring of Jerusalem, the Gihon spring, is situated right here on the eastern slope of this tiny hill, which today we call the city of David. Okay, now the spring sits very low. It sits quite close to the riverbed of the Kidron Valley that you might remember from our previous virtual tour, right? Remember how we were talking about Absalom's tomb, right, which is sitting right here, okay? So we're to the east of Jerusalem, the spring is situated here, and this is how Jerusalem started. It started on this tiny hill sitting to the south of Mount Moriah, right? Later we would call it the Temple Mount, right? But we're talking about the times when the temple is not built yet, okay? So the original name of the mountain is Mount Moriah, okay? So the city is some 5,000 years old. We're talking about one of the most ancient cities in the history of the humankind, okay? And some 3,000 years ago, King David conquers Jerusalem, proclaims it the capital of his united kingdom, and this is the city that King David was ruling, okay? So this is the first stage of the city. Now what happens in the times of King Solomon is that the city goes north, right? King Solomon would build the wall around Mount Moriah, and he would start his very ambitious building project on the mountain itself. He would build the first temple, right, which is this structure sitting on top of Mount Moriah, and he would also build Solomonic palaces, right, which we should imagine as kind of an administrative quarter, right? This is this area from which Solomon rules his vast empire. Now, there is a very important observation that you need to kind of get, right, as we're looking on this city, right? It looks like the city got quite a large new area, but that's what we would call in the ancient cities the upper city, meaning in this area only the temple and the king will be sitting, right? Meaning this area was not designated for the living compounds, which means that all the living neighborhoods were still sitting on this tiny hill, and with the time, right, this city becomes really crowded. And what happens little by little is that people start to leave the walls of the city. They're crossing the central valley of Jerusalem. You can see it right here, right? This model gives you a beautiful view of the original landscape of Jerusalem, the topography of the city, which is extremely important as we're looking on different stages in the development of Jerusalem. Okay, so now we're talking about the central valley of Jerusalem. So people are crossing the valley and starting little by little to build their houses on the western hill. Okay, so basically, when we're talking about First Temple times, Jerusalem would be sitting on two parallel hills, right? As you can see it clearly on this model, two parallel hills, the eastern hill, this one, and the western hill, okay? And three valleys are here, right? Three valleys are playing an important role in the history of Jerusalem. The Kidron Valley to the east, the Central Valley running through the heart of the city, and the Hinnom Valley to the west. Again, the advanced students among you who joined our first virtual tour, right? We were talking about the Hinnom Valley, and the priestly blessing, right, was the highlight of this specific tour. Okay, so little by little, the western hill gets inhabited. And for quite a long time period, all these new neighborhoods, they're sitting without a wall. And we should ask ourselves, why? Well, you need to know that in ancient times, to build a wall was a very expensive project, right? You don't start this project just like so, okay? In most cases, you needed, you know, an important reason to start this project. And now I'm taking you, kind of fast forwarding it, right? I'm taking you to the 800s BCE, and those are very dramatic times in the history of the ancient Near East. The Assyrian Empire starts its expansion, right? It starts going Assyria, right? We're talking Mesopotamia. This is the area of modern Iraq to the north of Israel, and they're starting to expand south. They're starting to conquer all the smaller nation states, right? And I'm reminding you, right, that these are the times that Northern Kingdom was already conquered by Assyrians, right? 10 lost tribes. This is the story. And King Hezekiah, who is the king in these times, right? This is who is ruling Judah in those days. He understands that he is the next in line, okay? So Assyrians are pressing from the north, right? They're not coming here because of Hezekiah, right? We're a small national kingdom, right? But the problem is that the ultimate enemy of the Assyrians is the ancient Egypt, right? The Egyptian kingdom. They're sitting to the south, right? And Hezekiah is right in the middle, okay? So imagine Assyrians pressing from the north, Egyptians pressing from the south, and that's how you get the idea, right? How it felt here in Judah in 800s BCE. And that's why King Hezekiah is now preparing his capital city for the siege. Okay? Now, as I'm talking to you about the siege, which is the most, you know, the biggest problem, right, of any siege, the problem is that you're all surrounded, right, with the army. No one goes in, no one goes out, and all the supplies that you accumulated as you were preparing for this war campaign, little by little, you ran out of them. And the most crucial thing, right, are the supplies of water. Okay, so the first thing that Hezekiah would take care of would be to guarantee the besieged city with a supply of water. Okay, so you might have heard of this amazing project of King Hezekiah. Right, we call it Hezekiah's Tunnel today. Okay, so what he did, remember we mentioned the Gihon Spring, right, sitting on the eastern slope of the city of David? Okay, we said that the spring was sitting very low to the riverbed, which was quite a problem, right? You can't protect the spring efficiently, okay? And then it was absolutely obvious that when Assyrians would come, they would see the spring, they would capture it, and this is how the story would end. Okay, so what Hezekiah does, he hides the spring. He builds an artificial wall, he covers this area completely, right, with some dirt, and he cuts an underground channel that was running, right, under this hill, an underground channel that brought the waters of the Gihon Spring to the fortified pool right here, Siloam Pool, right, over here to the south of the city. The pool that was sitting inside the walls of Jerusalem. Okay, that's how Hezekiah guarantees the supplies of the water. This is one of the most amazing attractions here in Jerusalem. You can still walk through the Hezekiah's tunnel. The water is still flowing through as it did some 2,700 years ago. This is an amazing experience, a lot of fun. Don't miss it, right? And when you will come to Jerusalem, make sure to do this, okay? By the way, this is one of those top 10 archaeological discoveries in Jerusalem, right? Which has to do with the biblical times, okay? But now, we took care of this water supplies. Second most important thing that King Hezekiah needed to take care of were the fortifications of the city. Okay, so here we're coming to this point that would be, right, the most important for us on this specific tour. Okay, so Hezekiah would be the one to build the wall, right, this new wall around all the new neighborhoods of Jerusalem that were built on the western hill. Right, you can see this wall running using the topographical advantages of this hill, and we're specifically interested in this section of the wall. By the way, you can see this red flag. This is where the Ariel Center, this tiny museum, is located in the Jewish quarter. Okay, very close to Hezekiah's wall. Okay, now this wall, it has a name. Okay, we call it a broad wall. Okay, so you can guess by the name that the wall is really very thick. How thick? The wall is 23 feet thick. Okay, huge, massive fortification, right? A monster of fortification. And again, we're talking 800s BCE. Imagine what it took, right, to build such a fortification. And that actually reflects you or gives you an idea, right, about the enemy that is coming to Jerusalem, right? If Hezekiah feels that he needs to invest that much in the fortifications of the city, you understand that the enemy that is coming here, right, it's a bitter enemy, okay? And the best way, right, to get an idea, right, how it felt here in Jerusalem in the wake of the Assyrian assault, right, I suggest you to read in Isaiah, right? So I will read you a short passage, right? This is the book of Isaiah, chapter 8, and this is how he sees, right, this coming armies of Assyria. My Lord will bring up against them the mighty, massive waters of the Euphrates, the king of Assyria, and all his multitude. It shall rise above all its channels and flow over all its beds and swirl through Judah like a flash flood, reaching up to the neck. So this is a very dramatic image, right, of a flood, flash flood coming to Judah. You know, even today in the modern times, flood is a disaster, right? It brings so much devastation. Many lives would be lost, right, when we're talking about these natural disasters, even much so in ancient times, okay? So this mighty king of Assyria with all his armies is coming here to Judah, and we need to fortify the city. And that's why the broad wall. Again, we're talking about this section, and in a second I will take you to the actual excavation. You will see the wall, the broad wall of Hezekiah. Now the question I want to ask you, do you think that the whole length of this new wall was that thick? Is that right? That all this wall is 23 feet thick? What do you think? The answer is no. An average thickness of the city wall is 8 feet. Okay, and only this specific section is that massive. And the question is, why? Now again, those of you who joined our previous virtual tours, we talked about this already, right? I pointed out several times that Jerusalem is all surrounded with deep, deep valleys, which is actually the natural defense of the city, right? And only in the northern part is relatively flat, which you can easily see on this model, okay? Which means that this is the vulnerable point in the defenses of the city. And that's why King Hezekiah invests that much in building this wall, right? Wall which is that thick in this specific area, because this area invites the attack. It's like an open secret. I must tell you that when Jerusalem was conquered, right, through all of its history, when conquered, Jerusalem was conquered from the north, right? Again, this is the topography, and again, it's an open secret. And Hezekiah knew, right, that the Assyrian attack would be centered, right, or would be directed right here. Okay, so this is the scale model. That was follow me, right, in order to get an idea who's coming here, right, to get kind of a better understanding of what is the Assyrian army, okay? So we will now travel to Nineveh, the capital of Sennacherib, okay, and to his royal palace, a palace without a rival, how he calls it. Please follow me. Okay, so in the late 19th century, the capital city of Sennacherib was excavated by the British archaeologists, and an amazing palace was uncovered, a palace of some 70 rooms, and the walls of these rooms, right, they were all covered with huge reliefs showing different royal exploits of the Assyrian king. Now imagine that the heart of this palace was apparently the throne room. Okay, this is where the king was sitting himself, right? And right before you enter the throne room, okay, there was kind of a small waiting room where all the nobles and kings, right, of this region would be waiting patiently to be accepted by the Assyrian king. Now, what's interesting is that the reliefs that were covering the walls of this waiting room, they actually were relating, or they were telling the story of the Assyrian War Campaign here in Judah. Now, why is it such an important observation? Because, you know, many times you would hear that Judah wasn't an important player in the international relations in the Middle East, right, in the ancient times, right? They would relate to Judah as being a small national kingdom and not an important one, okay? But again, I'm saying, if you want to impress the nobles, if you want to impress local kings, well, they're waiting there to see the Assyrian king, right? You want to impress them. You won't be bragging about stealing candies from a kid, right? To impress me, you want to show me fighting, yourself fighting with an ultimate fighting champion, okay? So it shows that this war campaign in Judah was important enough, or even very important for the Assyrian king. From the Bible, we'll learn that Hezekiah becomes actually the head of the coalition of small national kingdoms in this area which today is modern Lebanon, Syria, Israel, Jordan, okay? So this area, he becomes the head of the coalition of these kings who oppose the Assyrians. And this is a problem, right? Because they're blocking the way, right, of the Assyrians to Egypt, right? They're blocking the way south. And we said that the ultimate enemy was actually ancient Egypt, okay? Now, there is another fact which is pretty surprising. As you're looking at those reliefs, okay, the reliefs are actually telling the story of the Battle of Lachish. Lachish was, I wonder if you ever heard of Lachish. Now, Lachish was the second most important city in Judah, right? The city that is situated in the Judean foothills. It guards the way, right, from the coastal plain to Jerusalem, the capital, but this is still the second most important city. You know, I say Boston is an important city, right? But what's the real prize, right? What would be the real prize, right? It would be capturing New York or Washington. I hope we don't have people from Boston watching this broadcast, otherwise I will have a problem, right? But that's the point I'm trying to make. The Assyrian king, right, if talking about the war campaign in Judah, I expect him telling me the story of how he captured the capital city, how he captured Jerusalem, right? The temple city, the king's city. But the problem is that he never did, right? That's what the Bible will tell us. Assyrians who put the siege on Jerusalem, they never captured it. And that's why the best thing he can brag about, right? The only story he can tell, right, would be the story of the fall of Lachish. Now, I'll show you the picture, right? What those reliefs, what they look like. By the way, they were all taken to London. Today they are on exhibit in the British Museum. So next time you're in London, make sure to visit those. This is a fascinating archaeological find. Right, this is a media coverage, I would say, right, of the battle and the fall of Lachish. Okay, and here I have an enlarged picture. Okay, and it will help us to understand what Jerusalemites saw when standing on the walls of Jerusalem, right? What was the army that was approaching the walls of Jerusalem? So have a look. On the upper register, the upper part, are the walls of Lachish. On the walls of Lachish, you see the defenders of the city, right? And here, the lower part of my picture, right? This is the Assyrian army. You know, even from a very quick view, you can see the army which is well organized, right? You can see different units wearing different clothing, right? Having different kinds of weapons. We have cavalry here. We have archers, right? And archers are hiding. Well, I'll show you in a second. Okay. Just how impressive the reliefs are. Okay. This is the Assyrian cavalry. Okay. And this is the infantry. Okay, short swords, long spears, shields. By the way, all the things that look like eggs to you, okay, these are the helmets, right? This is how Assyrian artist shows you the multitudes, right? The Assyrian multitudes that are coming here, as Isaiah put it, okay? And these are the archers, okay? Now they're standing behind the shields, so they're well protected. You can see how much thought is invested here in the organizing of the attack. Okay, now what I love most, okay, is actually the employment of artillery. Okay, let's see. Can you see this guy over here? Okay, this is the artillery. He has a sling. Okay, maybe my picture is even better. Okay, he has a sling and a sling stone, which is a deadly thing, right? And their aim is that the defenders of the city would be keeping their heads down, right, as the army approaches, right? That's what modern army would do by shelling the cities. Okay, now have a look on them. Okay, these are the slingmen of the Assyrian army, and those are actual sling stones found in the dig at Lachish. What's the biblical story that immediately comes to your mind when I'm talking about sling stones? Right? How do we know it is a deadly thing? Do you remember David and Goliath? Okay, so this is the artillery of the ancient world. Now the focus of this specific relief, right, is on the main gate of the city, right? You can see the tower, okay? And apparently a gate, which is an opening in the wall, right, is a vulnerable point in the defenses of the city. So the attack is kind of directed on the city gate. Now you can see that the defenders are fighting fiercely, right? They're throwing stones on the approaching army, trying to keep it as far as possible from the wall. What are these? What are these? Write us in the comments what it looks like to you. You know, when I'm asking my kids, right, what it looks like, or any kids, the answer would usually be sweets. Right now, apparently the defenders of the city were not throwing sweets, right? And the attacking army, those are torches, okay? They're throwing torches not to burn the soldiers. They're trying to burn the siege machines, right? Battering rams. They're made of wood, right? This is a massive army on the march, okay? So the siege machines, they're made, all the siege engines, right? They're made of wood so that you will be able to take them apart, right? And then put them together as you prepare for the attack. So the defenders are trying to burn these battering rams, okay? Now Assyrians, they knew that that's what they would try to do. And that's why have a look on this battering ram. Can you see it looks like there are stitches on the machine? Okay, so they are actually covering this wooden siege engine with some skins, okay, to protect the battering ram. Now, you can see the unit that sits on this on this machine, right? Okay, the archer, which makes a lot of sense, but then you have this strange guy who sits with his back towards the city. What is he doing here? Can you see a huge ladle? Okay. My kids were sure that he is pouring some spaghetti. Okay, it looks very much like a spaghetti, but no, he's not pouring spaghetti on his machine. Okay, he is pouring water. Okay, he's watering the skins of the battering ram so it won't burn of all these tortures. Can you see how sophisticated the warfare is? And this is 800s BCE. This is like a real-time media coverage of the battle, okay? And just to show you how sophisticated the warfare is, I want you to have a look on this group right here. This group right here. What do you see here? Have a close look, okay? Can you see that we're talking about the impaled in the plain sight of the main gate of the city? I'm looking for a better picture. Shimon, will you check it? Will you check in my bag in the other room? Okay, in a second I will show you a better picture, right? But right in front of the middle gate, right in the plain sight of those who are sitting on the wall, you have these three naked figures, okay? That's what we will call today psychological warfare, right? They're trying to break the fighting spirit of the defenders of the city, right? Open your gates, because otherwise this is gonna be your fate, okay? So thank you, Shimon. This is how it looks like on the original relief, okay? This is the army that comes to the walls of Jerusalem, and this is an important thing because that's what the Bible tells you. The Lachish would fall, right? And from Lachish, Sennacherib is sending his army to the walls of Jerusalem. So now you have an idea, right? Who's the enemy? Right, and you understand that that Hezekiah wasn't exaggerating when he is building this massive wall of his. So now please follow me to the actual archaeological site. Okay, so we're out and we're in the heart of the Jewish quarter of the Old City, and this is the wall. This is the wall that Hezekiah builds to protect his city from the Assyrians that are coming here. Okay, that's what we call the broad wall. You can see how thick it is. Remember, we mentioned the thickness, which is 23 feet. Okay, now what I really want you to pay attention as we're standing here, right, is actually the difference in the street level, okay? Apparently, I'm standing right now on the modern street level of the Jewish quarter. Have a look on all the houses around. This is what I mean by the modern street level, okay? But as we look down, you see the wall all the way down there. This gives you an idea of what a historical city means, right? We're talking about archaeological mounds, right? We have dozens and dozens and dozens of archaeological layers, right? That are representing different historical time periods. Many times, as we're talking about the history of Jerusalem, that would be representing different human civilizations. Okay, so basically, right, there are tons of debris and rubble, right, that are accumulated here during the long history of the city, and that's why this difference. I mean that the street level in the times of King Hezekiah was all the way down there. Okay, now you should wonder, right, how come that such a vast archaeological dig became possible in the heart of the living quarter? The answer is the destruction of the Jewish quarter in 1980 and 1948. Okay, so reminding you, right, the course of the events. 1948, the state of Israel was proclaimed, the War of Independence broke out, and it was fighting all over the country, and the situation here in the Old City was really bad. The Old City was under siege for half a year, and when it finally falls in the hands of the Jordanians, they're making quite a point of ruining the Jewish quarter completely. Okay, there was no house was left standing. Okay, there were no Jews left in the Old City when Jordanians conquered it. Okay, part of the population was expelled, part of the population was taken captive to Jordan, and for 19 years, Jerusalem was a divided city. The Old City was controlled by the Jordanians, okay? And it was basically laying in ruins, right? In these 19 years, the Jewish quarter becomes a city dump, okay? In 1967, the Six-Day War, when Jerusalem would be reunited under Israeli control, right, was only ruins around. But now, the only good thing about this, if I can call it a good thing, right? The only good thing about that was, since all of what was laying in ruins, an archaeological dig became possible. And this is how, right, these amazing finds from the First Temple period were uncovered. Okay, so most people, when coming here, they would be looking, right, since the wall is so important, was decided to leave this area, right, this wall as an open archaeological site for everybody to enjoy, free of charge. Make sure to put it on your bucket list, right? The Hezekiah's wall, the wall of the First Temple period. But again, as we're standing here, I want you to see the difference, right? The level where the modern houses of the Jewish quarter are sitting, right? And the street level, you can see the bedrock here, right? The street level from the First Temple times. Another thing, okay, just a curiosity, have a look on this sign, which gives you a basic information about the broad wall, okay? But I want you to see the emblem of the Jewish quarter, okay? Can you see on the upper part, you can see the houses, right? And then you see that those houses of the modern Jewish quarter, they have deep, deep roots, right? And you can see the menorah, right, which was one of the vessels of the Jewish temple, right, representing the deep, deep roots and the deep, deep connection that the people of Israel have with Jerusalem. So please follow me. You will have an exclusive look on the broad wall, okay? All the houses around are living houses of the Jewish quarter. Again, an important thing to remember, right, that the Old City is not a museum. People are living here, okay? Now we'll ask Rabbi Shimon to open for us the site. I needed to pull some strings in order to bring you all the way down, right, to have this intimate look, right, on Hezekiah's wall. So this is quite an unusual thing to be able to go all the way down to the broad wall. So please follow me. Watch your step. Okay, so we went all the way down to the archaeological site itself, and I'm standing right now on the very wall, which is 2,700 years old, built by Hezekiah. And I can't explain to you the excitement that I feel being able to stand where Hezekiah himself stood, facing the Assyrian army, where Prophet Isaiah stood, proclaiming the word of God. And this is probably which makes this story so special, because many times, right, when people are reading the Bible, right, they would ask themselves, what am I reading? Right? Is it a historical narrative? Well, apparently the Bible is not a history book, right? It has much larger goals, right? It's a spiritual book, right? But it has a very strong historical core, I would say. Okay, and this story, the story of the Assyrian siege of the city, is actually the best documented story, right? So what we're trying to do on this story is actually to show you how biblical narrative, extra biblical sources, in our case, right? Those are Lachish reliefs, right, and the Prism of Sennacherib, right, that are giving you the Assyrian report of this war campaign in Judah, right, and the archaeological finds, how all this are united to create a very vivid, I would say almost 3D picture of the ancient past. Okay, so I'm standing on the wall, but it's important to remember, right, that this is not the actual height, right? As we're standing here, and in a moment I will take you all the way down, right? We'll be standing at the foot of the wall. Okay, so wait for this, just a couple of minutes, but it's important to remember that we're talking about the base of the wall, right? These are the foundations. They're built with massive filled stones with almost no masonry work to them. Okay, and this is what is surviving today. Okay, have a look on my picture. Okay, this is the broad wall of Hezekiah. Okay, it was much taller, but you need to know that in this region, the upper parts of the walls that were built with mud bricks. Apparently, those are not surviving for 2,700 years, okay, given all the destructions of the city. So as we're talking about this very site, remember that we're talking about the foundations of the wall. Okay, you can see the map of the old city right behind me, okay, and the location, the exact location of the broad wall. Now, the question is, standing at the top of the wall, right? So where the city is, so the city is right behind me, okay? You should imagine Jerusalemites frightened, right, in the face of the Assyrian attack. You should imagine them sitting right behind me. This area is outside of the city. This is where we should picture to ourselves the Assyrian encampment, okay? And if you will have a look on the opposite wall right here, we'll see a yardstick which gives you an estimation of the original height of the broad wall. So again, we're talking about the wall that is 23 feet thick, and the estimated height is around 26 feet. Apparently the wall was much longer, right? This is the portion that was exposed in the dig, which is some 123 feet long, a very impressive archaeological find. Okay, so now we'll go all the way down to see the outside of the wall, right? The side that the Assyrian army is facing. So please follow me. So we're finally at the foot of the wall. This is it, right here, right next to me. We are outside of the city, right? This is where the Assyrian army is stationed, okay? And you can see that the wall, the city wall, the protective wall of Jerusalem is built with massive stones, field stones, okay? Now you need to know that in the First Temple period, they're not using any kind of mortar, right? You can see that the gaps, right, all the holes in between the larger stones, they were actually filling them with smaller stones. This is a typical building technique in the First Temple, times. I also want you to see the bedrock exposed right here. Okay, this is the bedrock. You can clearly see that the wall here is the fast architectural element. Okay, so this area is actually outside of the city. Apparently, the old city of today is much larger than the city back then. Okay, so this is where we should imagine the Assyrians standing, and on top of this wall are Jerusalemites starving and frightened by the approach of the Assyrians. You remember all the pictures of the Assyrian soldiers from the reliefs that I showed you, and we started to talk about the employment of naked threat that the Assyrians used when attacking the city or putting a siege on the city as part of their warfare. So another example would be this part of the relief, right? You can see again the battering ram, and then there is this strange guy which sits on this battering ram, but he has no weapons with him, and he actually holds a scroll. I hope very much that you can see the scroll that he holds in his hands. So this actually reflects, this is an Assyrian relief, right? But this reflects beautifully the story that is told about the Assyrian siege of the city. Remember Rabshakeh, right? When the army moves from Lachish to Jerusalem, there is a high-ranked Assyrian delegation which comes to the walls of Jerusalem so to negotiate the surrender, the possible surrender. You know, this is a clear interest of any king, especially the king that takes his army on such a long march, right, who is very far from his kingdom, to preserve the army, okay? So he sends his high-ranked officers to negotiate the surrender of Hezekiah, right? He comes in a full power, he brings all his army, right? And here is these people who are negotiating the surrender. Now, I strongly recommend you to go through this speech of Rabshakeh, right? The speech that was delivered in Hebrew. You know, today when countries are negotiating, which is the language that they're using? They would be using English, right? Which is the language of international relations today. So back then, there was such a thing as well. Not talking English, right? Back then, the language of international negotiations was Aramaic. Okay, but Rabshakeh comes here. He stands at the foot of the walls of Jerusalem, and he speaks Hebrew. He makes a point of speaking Hebrew because he is here not to negotiate with the officials that Hezekiah dispatched for these negotiations. He's speaking directly to the people who are on the walls, right? And what is he telling them? So his speech is an excellent example of a political propaganda. This is like a mix of history, theology, naked threats, everything together to break the spirit of the defenders. He's not here to negotiate. He's here to make sure, right, that the best interests of the Assyrian king are secured, okay? And if there is a possibility to preserve their army without storming the city, he would try to reach this goal, okay? So again, biblical narrative telling you about Rabshakeh and the Syrian reliefs showing how it was done, okay? A carrot and a stick, impaled man, right, in front of the city gate, and also an official delegation that would come to negotiate and persuade people to open the gates of the city, okay? So this negotiation apparently was a failure, okay? And Jewish officials, right, the officials that King Hezekiah sent here, in the end of this speech, right, they're ripping their clothes, right, because they feel that this flash flood, as Isaiah described it to us, the waters of this flood, they reached the neck, right? It feels like everything is lost, okay? So we'll stop here for a moment at this dramatic point, okay? Because there is another secret that the broad wall holds here, okay? So please follow me. I want to show you a very special find which reflects beautifully biblical narrative, and which was quite a surprise for the archaeologists who were digging here. So I'm walking around along the wall, and you can see how the ground level steadily rises, okay? And I'm standing here next to this tiny wall. Now you have already some background in biblical archaeology thanks to these virtual tours, and you can clearly see that it has nothing to do with the city wall, right? You can see that those are much smaller stones, right? If you will have a look here, right, you will immediately notice the difference. This is a tiny wall, right? A tiny building stones compared to what we saw previously. So this is actually a private dwelling. This is a house that used to sit here outside, right on the outskirts of the city. Now when Hezekiah starts to build the fortifications, preparing his city for the Assyrian assault, what happens with the house? Today we call it eminent domain, right? The house would be actually taken apart because this is the best area, right? The strategic point. This is where the wall should go to get the best all the topographical advantages. So they're taking the house apart, and the wall slices through this house. Why I'm so excited about this house, because that's what we're reading in Isaiah. He was actually outraged by this fact. He's not saying that wasn't the right thing to do. Apparently, Jerusalem needs this wall, and there is urgency and drama in building this wall. But that's why we love this prophet, right? He's capable of saying an anonymous person, right, a plain Jerusalemite, whose house was standing here before this vast national project started. And he says, you numbered the houses of Jerusalem, and you took them apart to fortify the wall, right? That's what Isaiah says about what was happening here, and that's what we see here exposed in the archaeological dig. Once a private dwelling, its walls taken apart, and its stones used or reused to fortify the city. This is an absolutely, exciting moment to be able to see the biblical narrative just like this in front of us. So what happened next? The Assyrians are stationed here. Isaiah, Hezekiah on top of the wall, and we said that the waters of the flood, they reached the neck, okay? And it feels like everything is lost. But Hezekiah goes to the temple and he prays to God, and God answers. God answers through his prophet Isaiah. And he says like this, or he gives godly promise that Jerusalem would be saved in these words. Thus said the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, he shall not enter the city, he shall not shoot an arrow at it, or advance upon it with a shield, or pile up a siege ramp against it. He shall go back by the way he came. He shall not enter the city, declares the Lord. I will protect and save this city for my sake and for the sake of my servant David. Okay, a very powerful promise. Just imagine how Isaiah standing here and talking directly to the Assyrians who are standing at the foot of the wall. And what's the most amazing thing about this? That the promise would be kept immediately, right? And it goes on, right? And it says, that very night, an angel of Lord went down and struck down 185,000 in the Assyrian camp, and the following morning they were all dead corpses. So King Sennacherib of Assyria broke camp and retreated and stayed in Nineveh. And I must tell you that he returns home only to find death at the hands of his own sons. Okay, so imagine, right, how this drama is ending. Okay, now this is a miraculous deliverance of Jerusalem, and that what makes this story a really fateful event in the history of the Judean kingdom. Because imagine what if, right? Usually historians were not using this formula, what if, but just imagine for a moment that Jerusalem was taken by Assyrians, right? And it would actually follow the footsteps in this case, right? It would have followed the footsteps of Israelite kingdom, right? The northern kingdom of Israel to the exile and extinction. Okay? But the fact that Jerusalem was saved and it was seen as an act of God, God's providence, this actually strengthened the faith of the people in their God to the extent that even when the Babylonian exile would happen and Jerusalem would be ruined by the Babylonians, right? The faith of the people won't be shaken in their God, right? Not only they won't pine out there in Babylonian exile, they would actually thrive there, right? They would flourish, would be flourishing Jewish community in Babylon, and the first moment they will get a permission to go back to Zion, they will do, right? And this is how another time period, the Second Temple period, would start. And this is a completely different story. And we want to finish here with this thing, right? Which is the Prism of Sennacherib. This is how Assyrian kings were writing down the history. This is how annals of the Assyrian kings look like. And this is what he gives a report of his war campaign here in Judah. And it goes like this. As for him, Hezekiah, I confined him inside the city of Jerusalem, his royal city, like a bird in a cage. Full stop. Okay? So this is all what the Assyrian king has to say or to tell us about his war campaign in Jerusalem. This is a very powerful metaphor, right, for a siege. A bird in a cage. If you're not feeding this birdie, not giving it water, the birdie would die. Very powerful image. But I'm saying, and then what happened next? Don't keep me in tension. Tell me what happened next, how the siege ended. But since the Assyrian king never captured Jerusalem, right, he stops here. And he's not telling the full story. He's telling the best part of his story from his point of view. That's all what he did. He actually put a siege, but never captured Jerusalem. And Jerusalem, up to this day, right, as far as we know from the historical writings or and archaeological finds, Jerusalem is the only city that wasn't conquered by Assyrians. Okay? Which is really a miracle, you know, as you're looking on the history of the ancient Near East. And now I'll show you a beautiful example of a dialogue of two ancient sources. So this is an Assyrian prism, right? And the Assyrian report of this war campaign. And now I'm taking you to Isaiah 31, verse 5, when Isaiah is speaking about God's deliverance of Jerusalem, he puts it like this: as the birds that fly, so will the Lord of hosts defend Jerusalem, defending and delivering it, passing over and preserving it. Okay, so you can see how, as if Isaiah is answering the Assyrian scribe, right? We all understand that we're not sitting at the same table picking to each other, which is the best metaphor to use. But as if Isaiah the prophet is answering the Assyrian scribe, you say you put Hezekiah as a bird in the cage? No, like the birds that fly, right? That's how Jerusalemites would be free and safe, saved by God of Israel. Okay, so this is true. This acts of Hezekiah, right? This vast project of his, all his investments, they preserved Jerusalem. They gave, another 100 years of independence for Judean kingdom in a very dramatic times in the history of the ancient Near East. Jerusalem would be conquered by the Babylonians later on, but this story, right, the deliverance of Jerusalem would be the source of comfort, right, and hope for Jerusalemites in many generations. And if you will have a look up, right, you will see a playground where kids of the Jewish quarter play, okay, right next to the broad wall. And one of the, famous comforters of the Jewish people living for the exile was Prophet Zechariah, who told them that there shall yet be old man and woman in the squares of Jerusalem, each with staff in hand because of their great age, and the squares in the streets of the city shall be crowded with boys and girls playing in the streets. Okay, so this is the ultimate picture of peaceful times when kids are able to play on the streets of Jerusalem. And that's what we wanted to share with you, right? How special the city is. Walking on the streets of this city, you see prophecies fulfilled. The broad wall that witnessed the Assyrian siege, that witnessed the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians, and the playground sitting right above it, and kids playing peacefully on the streets of Jerusalem. Thank you very much for joining this broadcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Give us a feedback in the comments. We'll be more than happy to read those. Stay safe. Goodbye.